Hi everyone, so today we're going to be looking at the influence of early attachment on later life. So in this we're going to talk about lots of different stages of life, so we're not just referring to later on in life in terms of an adult, but we're also referring to later in life in terms of childhood, friendships made in childhood, romantic partners, and also just adults in general. So we're going to look back at the internal working model and different attachment types. So it's really important that if you're not sure on these or not confident on this, that you go back and look at the video on internal working model and the one on strange situation where they talk about attachment types. We're also going to then explain how these ideas apply to childhood and adult relationships, and then we're going to look at the strengths and weaknesses of using the internal working model to explain later relationships. So as a recap of the internal working model, Bowlby suggested that attachment to a primary attachment figure provides a child with a mental representation or a framework, as we've called it, or a template for future relationships. And this therefore suggests that if we have a positive mental framework of relationships through our primary caregiver, then later on in life we will also have positive relationships with other people, whether that is friendships or romantic relationships. So early life influencing later relationships. And this is leading to the continuity hypothesis, which suggests that later relationships are because of and are a continuation of early childhood experiences and early attachment types. So depending on what attachment type you are, depends on what attachments you'll have when you are an adult. And the very first attachment experience that we get is with our primary caregiver. And it's found that those who are securely attached, so have a reliable caregiver, are likely to assume that other people are also reliable and can be relied upon, and therefore they seek out relationships that are like that. So friendships which you can lean on and be supported by your friends, for example. But if you've had an attachment type where you don't really care about other people and you've been distanced from other people, or alternatively you're clingy and too emotionally close to other people, then you might show more ineffective relationships or might struggle to form relationships because you expect these behaviours of other people, i.e. you might be distrusting of people, or alternatively you might be too over-reliant on other people. So you might want to think about now, from the pictures, what sort of future relationships can the internal working model explain? And use your knowledge of the attachment types to predict how early attachment can affect later life. And then you could use the study about Bailey et al. To support or challenge your ideas. So hopefully you should have said that childhood friendships or bullying, as an example, there's also adult and parent-child relationships, are all affected or all happen because of the type of attachment you have as a child. And Bailey et al. Actually found out that the majority of women had the same attachment type as their babies and their own mothers, suggesting that we're most likely to use our own frameworks for how we raise our children. So, bullying and parenting. What's actually been found is that insecure avoidant infants are more likely to be bullied, and insecure resistant infants are most likely to be bullies. Now this is really interesting and was from a questionnaire of children aged 7 to 11 in London, and Myron, Wilson and Smith found this, and it suggests that insecure avoidant, where they don't like to have social contact with other people as much, don't trust as much people, are more likely to be bullied because they feel excluded from relationships. Whereas those are clingy, need people to feel like they respect them and are important and valued in their life, so are more likely to bully them. So we can see how the links appear from the early relationships to later childhood. But not only that, it's also shown that actually this keeps going and is continued into adulthood. McCarthy found that adult women who'd been assessed when they were infants still had the same attachment type. So those who were securely attached infants had really secure adult friendships and relationships. But those who were insecure resistant really had problems maintaining good quality friendships. And those who had insecure avoidant attachment types are more likely to suffer with intimacy problems and didn't trust people, which we know is a characteristic of those with insecure avoidant attachments. Now, you might want to have a go at this yourself, but Hazan and Shaver produced a love quiz to provide evidence of this continuity hypothesis, and they looked at 620 replies, which they put the advert in the American local newspaper and just got back replies. So it's a volunteer sample. And it was assessing their relationships and their love experiences over a number of partners, and they looked at different attachment types and they tried to work backwards. So a key problem with this is that actually they use the questionnaire to decide what attachment types they'd had as children, but we don't actually know that was definitely what they had. And because it's a self-report measure, this makes it hard to be certain that that is the type of attachment that they showed as a child as well. So there's also a problem with a lack of cause and effect here, where we're not sure that early relationships affect later life. But it was a really interesting study because they aimed to see whether that continuity hypothesis did exist. And so we would expect to find, therefore, that children who are securely attached had securely attached and made functioning adult relationships. So Hazan and Shaver actually found that 56% were securely attached, and this led to a positive correlation between the type of attachment that they had, so say they were securely attached, and the type of love experiences that they had as adults, so better functioning and more successful adult relationships. So secure attachments were more likely to have longer lasting relationships, whereas those with insecure avoidant attachment types were more likely to be jealous and they feared intimacy. Insecure resistant tended to fall in love easily, but found it difficult to find that one true person that they wanted to be with their whole life. And therefore it suggests that adult relationships are a reflection of our early attachments, but as we said, there are problems with this study. So we can see that our attachment with our parents affects how we relate to our peers, but also our later romantic relationships in adult life. So there's a really clear link between these three things. Now, if we're thinking about the evaluation, we want to think about something which is free will determinism, and you might have come across this before. You need to know that free will is the idea that we have a choice over our behaviours and how we act, whereas determinism says that we are determined or controlled by our internal mechanisms, so we can't control our own actions. And there are different levels of this. This isn't one extreme or another, but we can think of it more as a continuum, i.e. that free will sits on one side and determinism sits on the other side. And some people or psychologists are very free will, and some psychologists believe in hard determinism. But others believe that we have some free will, although some of our behaviour is determined. So we can sit somewhere in the middle if we like. Now have a think about which does this theory relate to. Do you think it's suggesting that we have free will or that our behaviour is determined? So hopefully you should say that our behaviour is determined because our internal working model is determining, and our early childhood experiences are determining how we behave in later childhood and adulthood. So if we don't have control over what attachment types we have as a child, and that is affecting what happens to us later in life, then that means that our behaviour is controlled by something outside ourselves. And this kind of leads to a negative ethical implication in a way, because we're suggesting that those who are insecurely attached are basically doomed. There's nothing they can do, and that their later relationships will just be less successful. So you need to think about how socially sensitive is this research. If we're saying that these guys have no chance of being successful in relationships, then that's going to have a negative implication on them. For example, those who took the love quiz might think, therefore, if they have an insecure attachment, that that's it and they can't make successful relationships, so what's the point in trying? So we need to be careful about explaining this research to people who are either involved in the research or those who it might apply to. And that's why it's socially sensitive. So we need to think about explaining the negatives or the weaknesses of the love quiz as an example, so that people see that it's not a cause and effect. It might just be that it's likely to happen, but it doesn't mean that you have no free will. Other evaluation points include Zimmerman, and he said that there was very little relationship between the quality of types of attachment. So he's actually saying that infant attachment and adolescent attachment differ majorly, and to their parents as well. So actually, maybe children aren't as predictable, like behaviour isn't determined as much as we first thought. Additionally, a lot of the research uses self-report techniques. We're having to presume that early relationships are what has been reported, whereas in fact they might not be. We know that children, it must be really hard to remember back to when you're 1 or 2 years old. Most of us don't have memories of that, and that makes it really difficult for us to make accurate judgments. And finally, a lot of the research, because of this, because we are reporting on early childhood later on in life, is an association. We're not saying there's a causation between the two, and that means actually there might be other factors involved which make the study find those findings and not actually attachment type. I hope that was helpful.